do have folks online. We do have
Okay.
folks online. Hi, everybody. I'm Selena Happel. I'm the head of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Sciences at Oregon State University, and work down here at Hatfield and have been here for many years, and really excited to welcome our guest today, Martine Thiel or Thiel?
Thiel.
Thiel.
Mhm.
Yes. Martine is with the, he's the managing director of MarineGEO, which is a network of observatories worldwide that's supported by the Smithsonian to get the public involved with data collection and exploration of coastal ecosystems. And this allows broad scale monitoring and experiments to better understand global change and marine system processes. He's the founder of Científicos de la Basura. So the garbage scientists.
We translate it as litter science. Yes.
Which is based in Chile. It's a citizen science program, which is a research collaboration between scientists, teachers, and school children from 11 Latin American countries to monitor and understand patterns of marine litter and plastics. He's was the professor of marine biology at Universidad Catolica del Norte in Coquimbo, Chile.
That's correct. Yeah.
For 25 years, and was a Pew Marine Fellow in 2018, and I worked with Pew quite a bit too.
Okay. Yes.
And he's a highly accomplished scholar with almost 30,000 citations of his acclaimed work in ocean ecosystems, primarily invertebrate community and population ecology, with a strong emphasis on how organisms respond to climate change. He also has studied marine debris and microplastics and integrates biological, physical, and social sciences. So Martine, thank you so much for joining us here at Hatfield, and we're excited to hear from you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I think I have the microphone here, so I don't need. Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I came to the US as a grad student in 1993. That's when I started my PhD. And you hear about all these other, and I was at a marine station at the East Coast in Maine. And you hear about all these other marine stations in the US, and of course you hear about the Hatfield Marine Station, and I always thought how that might be out there on the West Coast. And actually I have seen a few marine stations in California. I've never made it to Friday Harbor. This is the northern one that I will have on my record now, and it's impressive. So yes, okay, so about my talk. I'm still a professor of marine biology, and I'm for 3 years with the MarineGEO program, trying to help to consolidate and expand the program to South America. And one part of my talk will be about this, what you see on this first title slide. And I brought a second title slide where I will talk a little bit about our experiences in Chile and about this program, Científicos de la Basura, and I will talk a little bit about the local experiences that we also have when we work with partners from all over the world. So you all know the oceans are changing, they are warming up, they become more acidic. There is the land-sea interactions that are changing. Marine litter, we already talked about that. Invasive species. And these changes affect all levels of life, from the individuals to the populations and communities. And it is important to be able to recognize these changes. And that sounds simple, but it's not always that simple, as you probably know. And it requires a lot of understanding about how these communities are functioning, and also which are the anthropogenic threats that are basically facing these communities. And that's what we're going to be talking about in my presentation today. So community functioning and anthropogenic threats will be the overarching umbrella, and we will talk first about doing collaborative research with professional scientists, then collaborative research with volunteer scientists, and then we will talk about doing that with both these groups together, which is actually really interesting. And finally, briefly, we will touch on the challenges and the opportunities. So, as I told you, is a tale of, or it's a story of two tales. The first one is happening here on the US East Coast, where the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center is located and where basically MarineGEO, the Marine Global Earth Observatory, has its home base. And the second part, the other part, is happening in Chile, in central Chile here. And you see it's all very gray here. We are just at the southern edge of the Atacama Desert. So it's like a little bit like California, maybe, or Baja California. So on average, we have 1 day of rain every year. That's, I think, very different than what you guys have up here. So this is where the university is. And so let's just jump in collaborative research with professional scientists. So at the Smithsonian, there is actually several institutes and parts that do marine research. And there's marine research at STRI, there's the Smithsonian Marine Station, and there is also the Smithsonian Environmental Research. And they have always done their research by themselves and not talked a lot to each other. And so in 2013, they tried to formally establish better links between all these different institutes and foster the Smithsonian Collaborative Marine Science. And that was when MarineGEO started. And MarineGEO then brings together first these Smithsonian groups that do marine research, but then also extends to connect with partners from all over the world at many different institutions. Yes. And so the idea is that MarineGEO brings these people together, doing projects together, and as you know, like by being able to tackle questions over larger geographic scales, we can also get stronger answers. And our basically main systems are the ecosystems on the edge, which, as we call them, which is basically coral reefs, seagrass beds, and oyster beds along the US East Coast. And we also do artificial or communities on artificial structures, which we have also all around the world, and which are very important because those are often the places where invasive species show up, for example. One important element of this are standardized protocols. And so all these research projects, we have these protocols in place, or we carefully develop them. Then the data, of course, is the other big piece. The data need to come together, need to be checked, and all that needs to be done. And once we have that, then we can actually do with those data some interesting science. And I want to show you an example this year, which we have been using in many different projects and contexts, is the squid pops. Have you guys heard about the squid pops? No? Okay, so it's actually a simple method to measure predation pressure. And you know, as you move across larger distances, you know that your predators may change or your prey species may change. Prey species behave differently in different places. So it's very difficult sometimes to compare. And it's also complicated if you work, for example, with live prey. So this is an assay that uses dried squid and cuts out these little circles and exposes them in the environment, and then measures how long they persist or how fast they disappear. Of course, we can later discuss all kinds of issues that this might have, But it allows you to do it in the same way across many different places, also across different habitats, and also across latitudes. So one study that MarineGEO did some years ago was looking at consumption and predation in seagrass beds, because as you know, seagrass beds, they have attributed this function that they are a protective environment for many juveniles, that they are a nursery ground for species because of their protective structure. And so we wanted to first test whether actually that's true, whether the predation in the seagrass bed is lower than in the surrounding unvegetated environment. And as you can see here, if you compare these green dots and the yellow dots, there is really not much difference. So predation consumption in the seagrass bed and in the surrounding open environment was pretty much the same. But if you look now across the latitudes, you can see that there's differences, that there's two peaks, one at mid-latitudes here in the northern hemisphere and one at mid-latitudes in the southern hemisphere. That was at first a little bit unexpected, and we don't know. We really don't know, because as you can see here at the equator, we didn't have anybody who was doing it. So there's a gap that needs to be filled at some point. But it's an interesting pattern that seems to show up in both hemispheres. So we just said that predation at mid-latitude. And now I want to take you to Chile, where we have been looking in the last few years at invasive species in tide pools. It called our attention that in tide pools, sometimes we found several of the notorious invaders, and the tide pools actually are the only natural habitat where so far some of these species have colonized natural habitats. Otherwise, they are only in these artificial structures, in aquaculture structures or harbor structures, and they don't make it into the natural environment, but with the exception of the tide pools. And so we try to understand this, and we thought this could be because the tide pools might be a refuge from predation, because we had in other studies shown that in the natural environment there's a lot of predation pressure, and the native predators basically eliminate the invasive species in the natural habitats. And so we thought maybe that's not happening in the tide pools. So we looked at that across the entire Chilean coast, like pretty much 2,000 miles here, which would be, I guess, I would assume from Washington to Baja California, here on this side. And the hypothesis was that consumption would be higher at warm temperatures at low latitudes. So these were the sampling sites where we exposed in the tide pools these squid pops, as we call them, for 24 hours. And we measured also the environmental variables. And one thing that we found first is that the main predators in the tide pools are crabs. So, and if we look at the latitudinal pattern, what we did find is there is predation across all the sites, but to our surprise, at the northernmost sites, at the lowest latitudes, we saw this drop in consumption again. So we again see this peak at mid-latitudes and the drop at the lower latitudes. And we are not 100% sure, but we think that maybe at low latitudes, in these tide pools, sometimes the temperatures become too extreme, and that therefore these crabs basically leave the tide pools or are not present. And so if we now look at this other study where we have this gap at the equator, but at least now we have this, which seems to suggest a similar pattern. High consumption at mid latitudes and a decrease towards the lower latitudes. So maybe it is stressful conditions that suppress the consumers at low latitudes. But that's, of course, something that needs to be investigated. So there is definitely room for more of this collaborative research. So in summary here of this first part, MarineGEO empowers this team science of collaborators from all over the world. But the other important thing that I wanted to show you with our example from Chile, it generates local capacity. Because before we participated here, this is our place, before we participated in this project, the global project, we had no idea about these squid bobs. We did not know that they exist. And so we learned this technique, and that has also happened in other studies, in other research that we have been doing. And so we have now local capacity, and what is true for us, it's also true for most of the other partners participating in these research projects. So now, all this research that I've been describing is with professional scientists, with scientists like you and me, which have a PhD behind our names and which have been doing research for many years, and who are interested, of course, also in these collaborative projects. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and look at collaborative research with volunteer scientists. And as we have said, this is about marine litter, and we have been doing that for many years in Chile. We started, actually this whole idea started when in 2001 we were studying floating kelps, which also is an interesting topic here on your coast. And you guys have some really fascinating floating kelps that we don't have in Chile or in the southern hemisphere. But during our trips, when we were, for example, at sea chasing these floating seaweeds or floating kelps, we also found floating litter. And during our travels along the Chilean coast, we saw images like this everywhere, and we noticed there's a problem. And when we looked at the information, nobody knew anything. There was basically no information. People knew that there's litter on the shore, but nobody had ever quantified that. So we did not know where it accumulates, and especially we had no idea where it comes from. And that was what I just showed you, that was in 2001. And so it took a long time because our task was, our project was investigating these floating kelps and not floating litter. So we did that, but we came across this litter again and again. And in 2007, we initiated this program, which we call Científicos de la Basura, litter scientists, where we work together with school teachers and school kids, and we do investigations on this marine litter. It's very important. We are not doing beach cleanups. That's not our job, because we are científicos, we are scientists. And that's also very important for the kids and also for the audience, because sometimes we give these presentations and then people afterwards come and say, it's so nice that you clean the beach. No, we don't clean the beach. We actually collect scientific data. Of course, working with school kids, you have to adjust your methods and your questions. They have to be so that they really can respond the questions that you are asking. So we are asking simple questions like what kind of litter is out there or where does it come from? And this last question is a little bit more complicated, but you can also try to simplify it. For example, There's a bottle here and there's a bottle up here, this red bottle. If I ask you which of these bottles has come from further away, the answer is easy. It's this bottle down here because it has all these marine organisms growing on it. And they are actually also quite big. So this bottle must have been traveling with the currents for at least 1 month or maybe a little bit more. And the bottle on the top has basically no organisms growing on it. So this bottle probably has spent very little time in the sea and is probably from local sources here deposited straight on the beach. Definitely not coming from further away. So then we work with 30 to 40 schools, and every year we do one investigation. And the first investigation that we did, and we have repeated it, is this: which are the cleanest beaches of the Chilean coast? We did that for the first time in 2008, 45 schools, 1,500 school kids from all along the Chilean coast. And these are the first data, scientific data of litter on the beach. Before, nobody knew anything. So we have simple materials, very straightforward sampling guides, and also very simple data table. And categories for which you don't need to study. If you guys have done marine litter research, you know that sometimes people classify, you really need to have a PhD in litter science to be able to distinguish all the different types of plastics. For us, it's just plastics. Of course, that in the end has a lot of limitations, because you want to know, is it like, for example, a single-use plastic bottle, or is it a buoys coming from fisheries? We don't know that. But in a place where you don't know anything, where you have absolutely no data, knowing what you have and something very basic is better than nothing. And so we also have a lot of materials, how to do a research, for example, investigation. This one is our highlight. We did that, like, I think more than 12 years ago. This means how to do an investigation. It's like a 5-minute, very simple video. And this has 200,000 views now. And it is because without us doing a lot, teachers, and actually the pandemic, that during the pandemic, some teachers somewhere discovered that and shared that with their colleagues, and basically the number of views exploded. So it seems like almost every school kid in Chile and South America might have seen this video. So, and the other thing is important, that we also train or show the kids that standardized research following a protocol is very, very important. Here we have a teacher from our city, Coquimbo. She actually works with us since 2007. So she continues to work with us in this research. And this is a teacher with her class from the southernmost city of South America, Punta Arenas. And you can see here, they both do it in the same area, 3 by 3 meters. So everything is comparable. And this is something that we teach the participants, that we emphasize to them, because they need to do a good job here when they do that. So then we get the data and we look at that and we see there's litter everywhere on the beaches. So there is a serious problem. And I'm not going to show you the data here because otherwise this is going to last forever. But all the research that we have been doing, we could clearly identify that beach visitors are one of the main sources of all this litter. And that's very, very important. So in Chile, for example, we get along all these coastal beaches, we don't get litter from the ocean. Almost nothing. Everything is local sources from beach visitors. And that's very important because then you can take actions if you know where it's coming from. And so this is also something that we encourage the school kids to share their results, share their insights, and also think about it. What should be done? You know, it's not just collecting data, it's also taking action. And so what does it mean? One thing that, of course, we want to know is, are there changes over time? Because over the last 10 years, legislation has changed a little bit. For example, single-use plastic bags, since about 7 years ago, they are prohibited in Chile. It's forbidden, like cigarette butts is one of the main items. And since legislation, it has been always forbidden to dump litter on the beach. That was never legal. So even though politicians, they sometimes thought, well, we need to make new laws. No, you don't need to make new laws. You just need to make sure that the laws are being followed. Well, but what they did actually, it's very interesting. They decided, well, there is laws, but there's still all these cigarette butts. So we're just going to plain forbid smoking on the beach. So nobody can legally smoke on the beach anymore. And that's another way to attack or to tackle these. And of course, then that makes it important to look what is happening over time. So since we have these standardized methods, we have been able to do this over the years. And we can compare not only over space, but also over time. And so we had done this in 2008, repeated in 12, in 16, and in 2020, we were able to use a little window when COVID at the end, towards the end of the year, died down and people could go to the beaches again. We did the sampling also in 2020. And so here are the results for the entire Chilean coast. You can see there is one city that has very serious and persistent problems, and there is no major change. The problem is there, and it definitely has not disappeared. But I always say it also has not increased. This is very important because over this time period, Chile has experienced an enormous economic growth and an enormous increase in consumption, in consumer consumption. And so the fact that it has not increased gives us a little bit of hope. Or I always try to see things from the positive side. So what can we do? This is another important thing. So we encourage the participants to think about things that they can do and to take actions. So first, as we had said, we encourage them to share their findings, but then we also encourage them to search for solutions and search for solutions that they can take. Because of course, if we want to ask the industry to change, for example, the products that they sell us, that's going to be a long shot. But they can take actions in their daily life. For example, use these reusable bags, shopping bags, and other things as well. And so we encourage them to do that. We also work very closely with the media. We share the findings that we have with the media so that also the other people know about this. And we also share the information in scientific publications because that's basically what is the foundation for requests to change policies. You need to have solid data in order to be able to change policies. And so if we look at Chile, where we have been working since 2008, you see there's a lot of information. available about marine litter in Chile. We have done it, but many, many other people have also done research. We have a relatively large community now of colleagues who study plastic pollution. We have a lot of information, scientifically validated information, and we have seen the first changes in legislation. For example, all the soft drinks had been since 2005 in single-use plastic bottles, and now this has shifted back so that the companies need to offer also returnable bottles. For many years, if you, for example, which I always say, you go to a store, and here's, I think it's the same, but you guys are better. You guys are good. So if you go to a store in Chile and you want to buy water, because this is one thing where you guys are really good in having public water fountains. This is something that I haven't seen any other country that has that. But here, everybody can get drinking water anywhere. So this is something that the world can learn from the United States. So that's a good thing. In Chile, we don't have that. So if you are thirsty and need to drink, you need to go to a store and buy drinking water. In some places, you can get it out of the tap. Since 2005, the only way you could get drinking water is in single-use bottles. Now, one of these laws, I think this one, actually establishes that the companies, they can offer it in single-use bottles, but they need to also have returnable bottles so that the people who want to buy it in returnable bottles have that option. So things are changing in Chile. But if you look at the other countries, you see there is very little information available in the other Latin American countries that border the Pacific coast. So there is this gap. And in 2018, we got the opportunity to fill this gap. That was just the Pew Fellowship that you mentioned. That was the opportunity to say, let's try to bring this approach also to these other countries. And this is the objective that we try to fulfill since 2018. So we have been working now with schools from all these countries between Chile and Mexico, here, all these different places. And the most important question is always, what is abundances and composition? Because the composition gives us an idea of where the litter is coming from. And so we have generated some information here that is available. And now our partners in these different countries, they can take this information and they can go to their governments and say, hey, we have learned this. Now you can do something to try to reduce this problem. So this is what we have been doing separately with professional scientists, and the last one, the litter, with volunteer scientists. Now I want to very briefly tell you about a project where we joined these two different groups. And you know this better than anybody, that litter may bring new species to the shores, because, and that has been documented in several parts of the world. First, the Gulf Stream brings a lot of litter from the American coasts over to Europe, and there's many different species that have been documented there, that are home, that have their home here, that are native species here, and that have arrived on this litter here in Europe, not yet established, but they regularly arrive on floating litter. And of course, this, you guys know that better than anybody. After the tsunami, a lot of that stuff came over here and brought hundreds of species from Japan that are not yet established here, that have not been documented here. And I often talk with Jim Carlton and I say, well, this is important. Now the next thing is that people need to look, are these species now, or are some of these species now showing up here in the benthic habitats? So, but the important thing is, this is just two places where we know this may occasionally happen, that this litter is bringing organisms over. But what is about all the rest of the coast? If you look here, you have here the Gulf Stream hitting Northwest Europe straight on. You have the North Pacific Drift hitting here, the North American coast straight on. But if you look at the world map, you see many different places where that's happening, like here, here, you know, here. And so do we see something similar in these other places? And this is what we wanted to know. And so here we combined now in this project that we call Ocean Travelers Project, these different networks of our volunteer citizen scientists, but also the professional scientists, so that we can have more or less broad coverage. And so we established the protocols for them. You can see here some of the sampling, and I don't want to go into the details. I just want to show this combination of teams of volunteers and professional scientists. We managed to sample 473 beaches all around the world. And I think that's all, yes. And so we have now worked together with professional scientists and volunteer scientists. And that has been also a challenge. The important thing is both groups followed exactly the same protocols, the professional and the volunteer scientists. So the professor, the researcher with his team went to the beach and did exactly the same thing as the school teacher did with his school kids. And that's interesting by itself. So we have talked at the beginning a little bit, when you work with volunteers, what are the main challenges that you are facing? What do you need to pay attention to? What do you have to work on working with volunteers?
Well, I bet a lot of people think that it's data quality, but I bet it's keeping them engaged.
Yes. Yes, that is like recruitment, get them and keep them on board, right? Have protocols that they can follow and that also sparks their interest. That's the other thing. Then do trainings. Communication is key to keep them engaged, as you say. But then data quality is definitely an important thing. And is in all this continuity. You need to follow up, and continuity is one thing that once you finish the research, you need to get back to them with your results. That's one part of the continuity. And then if you are able to keep it alive over longer time, it's even more interesting. So those are some of the challenges when you are working with volunteers. So what are the challenges now if you work with professional scientists? What? Yeah, what comes to mind?
For some reason, ego popped in my mind.
Yeah, sometimes could be, yes. We all have it, you know. I mean, I cannot deny it. Yes, time commitment, that's a very important point, yes.
Big sentiments of funding.
Yes, of course. But basically, in the end, it boils down to exactly the same challenges. You need to get them engaged. You need to have protocols that make sense to them. And the most important thing, you need to train them. At the beginning, both sides, actually, our scientific colleagues and we were a little bit kind of like maybe overconfident. We said, we give you the protocols. And I thought, well, I'm giving my colleagues the protocols. They can read, you know. And then and they also, oh no, we have done it, you know, we have done sampling on the beach and all that stuff. We know how to do this. And then we got the first data, and some of our colleagues, it was obvious that they had not read the protocols, you know. They went to the beach and did sample some litter, some interesting data, but not the data that we asked for. So then I said, okay, I mean, Selina, if you want to participate, I know you are very experienced, but you have to come to our virtual training. Yes, no way around that. So we became all more rigorous, and that helped a little bit, but the challenges are just the same. And of course, the time commitment is also for the volunteers the thing. The teachers sometimes are very reluctant because, and that's one of the things that we have also learned. We talk to the teachers and ask them, what do you need? What would you like to have? So that they can connect this investigation with their curriculum, with their thing, because they have no time to do extra stuff. Yeah, did you have a question?
Did you ever compare the outcomes between the professionals and the citizen scientists?
Well, actually,
Following direction?
yeah, so this is a critical question. Let me finish.
Okay.
And then we come back to that question. So what are the opportunities now of doing this kind of research?
Engage a much broader group of people,
Uh-huh.
and the more that are engaged, the more we'll appreciate
Yeah.
the work and potentially change behaviors.
That's a key point, right? And we see that with our school kids, you know, they have, so this has empowered them. And of course, like for us, from the scientific perspective, having these large-scale data sets allows us to see general patterns and to better understand the underlying mechanisms that create these patterns. And of course, like bringing all these people together when you talk with politicians, and actually, I don't like to talk to politicians. I rather prefer that the participants do that. And they do that. They talk with their local politicians, with, for example, the mayors, and that's very important. And of course, collaboration and building community. That is also very, very important for this kind of research. And that is also true for the volunteers, but also for us, you know. And in the end, what I say is we are also just human beings like everybody else. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Well, I do think that's an interesting question. How do the results compare between your profession?
Yes. So we have actually, since we saw these differences, we have analyzed this a little bit, and we have seen, for example, that basically there's no difference in, for example, we look at the data, the initial data that they submit, and there's always some people who have problems, and we see a similar percentage that have problems with the original data that they submit, and don't quote me on the percentages, but it's, I would say, like somewhere between 10 and 20%. We look at the data and we have questions. I think it's actually at least 20% where we have questions when we look at the data. And that's the same for the professional scientists and for the volunteers. Then the next step, we contact them. We say, hey, you know, this here doesn't, you know, we looked at that and something doesn't coincide. Can you help us? Can you explain? Then they explain, and then like, okay, in many cases we can say, yes, okay, makes sense, you know. For example, sometimes they have like hundreds, depending on where they put, it's just a fictitious example, but it could be that they would have hundreds of these cigarette butts in a certain place. And so then when we validate, we see a picture. So for validation, they send us the data and a picture of all the litter that they found laid out, and we recount that litter and compare it with the data. So of course, if there's like 150 cigarette butts, it could very well be that there is like 148 when you recount this on the picture, and they wrote 152. Yeah. Then I say we assume they did it right. But sometimes you see 150 and on the picture you see 15. Okay, so then you suspect maybe there is a zero that slipped in there that shouldn't be there. So you ask questions, and then they respond and say, yes, you are right, it's only 15. So those are the questions that we can respond. And sometimes there are questions that cannot be resolved, and then the data are discarded. We not take them in account. And that percentage also was very similar among our professional scientists and among our volunteer scientists. So also our professional scientists, sometimes they submitted data that we just could not, that did not pass our validation test. So, and other things then are that you contact people and ask them and they never get back, they never respond to you. That also happens. And that happens with the volunteers and with the professional scientists in the same way. So from my perspective, this question, they are just the same. Or we as scientists are just the same as the volunteers. And in fact, like with the volunteers, one thing that I can say, and this is like also my personal experience talking with the teachers and talking with my colleagues, the teachers, they listen very carefully how the protocol has to be done. And the scientists, on the contrary, yeah, I know how to do it. So yes, does it more or less respond to your question? Yes, okay.
Have you been able to see if any of the children that have participated have stayed in science, maybe because of these experiences?
Oh, I'm sorry. This should not have happened. Nobody ever calls me. This is scam. I don't even. Geez, I'm pushed. Sorry. Yes. So this is a critical question, and this is one of the pieces where we are not very good as a program. We do not follow up very well with the participating school kids. We do follow up with our teachers, but not with the school kids. We have many years ago, we have done a relatively rigorous study because we wanted to know this experience participating in such a citizen science project where they collect litter and do science. What does it do with them? Does it help to learn better, learn things? And does it also contribute to change in behavior? And we actually were surprised that we saw a little bit of improved knowledge, very little change in behavior. And we see two, like looking carefully at that, we concluded that there's two main things happening. They were already at a very high level of concern and of personal action at the beginning, before they did this. So there was not much room, like these famous ceiling effects, as they are called. And the other thing is that we think just one participation in one sampling does not do the job if around you the whole world actually points in a different direction. And so this can be powerful if you embed it in a wider strategy. That, for example, when they go to a store, that they see that there's concern, or when and we don't even have to go that far, you know, in the same school. And you know, this, so then, so our university in Chile, which is not here, so you don't need to remember it, they always pride themselves with pointing at this program. The university uses it, but then I come, for example, to a celebration of whatever, you know, like a colleague retires, and I come and they offer everything in single-use plastics. You know, I mean, if you want to offend me, do it in a different way. Do it directly, you know. I mean, so it's not only so this is something that is very important. It needs to be embedded in a wider effort. If we just do a single thing, it's just the same thing as a beach cleanup. You will not save the world, and you will not make this problem go away if you just do a beach cleanup. However, if you have all the other actions in place and also authorities, which is the school, which is the municipality, which is the companies, which is your politicians that you see on the radio, on the TV, you can't see them on the radio, that they all speak the same language. But if your president says plastic straws need to be used because the turtles is no problem for the turtles, you know, then you can do all this stuff and it's not going to help. Sorry, yeah.
No question.
All right, then I'll ask a follow-up question on
Yeah.
that. You're doing this every 4 years, and I can understand all the logistics and all that, but in a 4-year cycle, a single student, I mean, you get entirely different students.
Yes.
And they can't track through a program, but you also have teacher turnover in
Yes.
a 4-year period.
Yes.
So do you think you would see bigger change if this was and part of the regular school curriculum, you know, in December or whenever it happens to be, we go to the beach, this is what we
Yes.
do, this is what we learn, and it becomes this ingrained thing as opposed to
Yes.
showing up every 4 years and saying, hey,
Yeah.
remember me, we did this 4 years ago.
Yes. Okay. Good point. I couldn't tell you everything. I just showed you the beach sampling. So we work with them every year. Every year. For example, do you remember 2008, 12, 16, 20? I could have, if I would have been better, showed you also the data from 2024. So last year we did that again. This year, 2025, we are in our 4-year circle with the samplings of the rivers. So since 2013, every 4 years, we sample the rivers. And in between the year, for example, 2022, we did the ocean traveler sampling, where we focus on this litter that is floating and has these organisms growing on it. In the normal sampling, we don't have the capacity to do that, because if you try to do too many things, especially with these groups that go do it and then they have to rush back to school, if you would add more stuff on, it wouldn't work. So we do 1 year we do this, the next year we do this, and the ocean travelers we do in between, and other things we also do in between. So with the teachers, we work every year. And we are very much aware, and we listen very carefully to them. All these are things that we learned over time, you know, like the first year we just paid attention to our litter data. But then we have become better in that sense. And I brought some stuff. So we generate materials. For example, this is a storybook. It's called The Sisterhood of the Sea Turtles. So it talks about sea turtles, and it introduces the concept of organisms growing on the turtle's back. Here, one of the turtles has here, traveling with the turtle, but also organisms growing on other stuff. So we created this book to support this research program or project where we looked at the ocean travelers. And so this has a story about the sea turtles. They do their adventure So here the pictures is the story. And then below here, there is little facts. Where turtles migrate, how far they migrate, how long they live, what they eat, how they reproduce, all these things. And so they learn about this, reading the stories and reading the facts. And then in the end, we ask them, do you want to participate? There they have a few tasks that they can, and we ask them, do you want to participate in the research? So every school kid that participates, they get their own copy of this book. And so the teachers sometimes, you know, the Spanish teacher then takes this and they do, or the art teacher, for example, we have many times, they are encouraged to do theater plays about this or other stories that they invent themselves. So the important thing, every kid gets that, and I am convinced that for many kids in South America, it's the first own book that they have. And so that's very significant. So when the teacher gets the package with the books, they are very happy about this. So this is in Spanish, but if you would like to have one, maybe also for your visitor center, we do actually, during the pandemic, we did audiobooks about this story. So we have actually this a YouTube audiobook in Spanish. It's about, I think, 15 minutes, and in English. So we have some, you might even know some of the colleagues, you might recognize some of the voices. At least if you study plastics, you would recognize some of the voices maybe. So you can ask me later, or you just look for, oh, sorry, this here, Científicos de la Basura in the YouTube channel. There you can find these. Okay.
All right. Anything else online?
No.
All right. Thank you so much. That was fantastic, and really excited to think about how we might do more of this work here in Oregon and connecting with other marine labs and other programs up and down the coast. So yeah,
Yes.
fantastic.
Let's chat a little bit.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You could argue for the citizen science.
Well, definitely. And actually, you know, my point.
Oh,
Oh.
can we take a picture maybe so that I can yeah. Yeah, or maybe could you take it? Oh, well, well, maybe we can all stand here, or maybe we can find somebody else to take the picture.
What's that? Should we have-
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's not useful. There's the
Take
picture.
photos. There we go.
Yeah. And maybe, okay, yes.
Excellent.
And can you, the MarineGEO flag? So,
Yeah, get
That's-
us all in there.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
okay.
Excellent.
And
Oh,
we
my-
had 5
my-
more folks online.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We had 5 more folks online. So
Okay.
we're a little quiet right now.
Yeah.
We're talking about most of our marine educators are insanely busy this month.
Uh-huh.
So they weren't able to come, but with the recording, we'll
Okay.
make sure.
Yeah, the recording
Sure.
will get more people.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about that, you know, like I never, like I can, you know, at least I spend so much time in front of the computer. I would not connect to a virtual conference. I have, yeah, no, I mean, like even less, but I mean, I wouldn't even like during the pandemic, I tried it sometimes.